I write to inform you that during my most recent audience, the Nansur Emperor, quite without provocation, publicly addressed me as "fool." You are, no doubt, unmoved by this. It has become a common occurrence. The consult eludes us now more than ever. We hear them only in the secrets of others. We glimpse them only through the eyes of those who deny their very existence. Why should we not be called fools? The deeper the consult secretes itself among the great factions, the madder our rantings sound to their ears. We are, as the damned Nansur would say, a hunter in the thicket, one who, by the very act of hunting, extinguishes all hope of running down his prey. Anonymous Mandate Schoolman. Letter to Atyersus. Right, chapter 2. So this is the chapter in which Akamian meets with the quorum of the mandate. Primarily not Sarah and Simus. Seamus? The audiobook guy says Seamus, but that sounds too much like semen to me, and I don't know. I read it as Simus the first time through, even though that makes me think of Simeon. Simeon. Simeon, which is like a monkey. I don't know what Backer was thinking with some of the names in these books, like Coitus. Is that supposed to sound like coitus, or is it just a coincidence? I don't know. Anyway, so let's see. 64. Just a minor note. Note Sarah had said that all of the cults have, healed and kissed his knee. Mathanet, the new Shrya. And I don't know, I remember in later books the cult of Yatwar not really being too fond specifically of the Aspect Emperor. But I sort of get the sense that they weren't really too fond of the Thousand Temples before him. So this, I don't know, on their part probably was at least, sorry if there's a clicky noise, I just had to move my laptop. This is probably just performative on the part of the Yatwarian cult, but I'm not sure. It's possible that it might be genuine to them. I don't know. That's just something that came up in my head. Like, oh, all the cults, even the Yatwarian cult. But at this point, maybe it does make sense for them to do that. And I don't think Satma Nanaferi is leading it right now. She may be. I don't remember the specific timeline. And then this is just a bit that made me laugh, where Notzer had said that no fewer than 7 of the Emperor's agents were exposed and executed in Sumna. And I can just imagine how furious Zarias would have been, and how he's probably just like sitting there seething on his throne in the Endiamine Heights. I don't know. I just thought that was really funny. Zarias is a funny character, I think. I laugh a lot with his parts just because he's so fucking crazy. And not like, I mean, he is crazy, but he's not like completely unhinged. He's still sane enough to be dangerous. But I don't know. His segments are good. He's the whole uh, Ikuri house, I think, is interesting. I really, as bad of a person as Confus is, I really like his segments. I think they're really enjoyable to read, and I think he's a good comparison to Kellis. He's sort of like a mortal Kellis, right? But no, I'll get to that later. I don't know. I like the Ikuris. They're fun. Um, moving onwards, one of the quotes specifically that I thought I like these books partly because there are a few lines here and there that are just sort of dropped in there that are pretty profound or interesting to think about or mull over or be like, oh wow, that's actually really quite smart. And I mean, I'm not a smart person, so maybe these are things that other people have already realized and expressed. But the specific line in this case is, "Faith may die, but her sentiments remain eternal." And I just thought that was really good because I've seen that happen to other people in my life. Myself, I was not raised religious. My parents were both raised Christian, but they dropped it while they were still young and before they got married. So by the time they met each other and had me and my sibling and we grew up and all that, they were already way past religion. So I never really was raised with any faith in a religious sense. Um, and most of the sentiments that I have from growing up, I've not really had much I don't know, whatever faith I have in those beliefs hasn't really waned a whole lot because I don't know, I don't, my parents were sort of more scientifically minded, and so a lot of what they think is, or at least raised us to think, is based on, scientific method. What what do we see? What makes sense? What it, you know, just a way that it's sort of, I mean, there aren't really necessarily any sentiments that are tied to that 100%. It's more sort of a way of looking at the world than a guidebook for how to see the world, if that makes sense, I guess, right? The Bible straight up tells you, like, gay people are not good. That is a sin. Whereas from a scientific viewpoint, or not necessarily scientific, but a more, I don't know, empirical or logic based approach, one sort of just, the sentiment is gay people exist, and from the behaviors and the effects that their behaviors have on society, we can come to conclusions about, the nature of homosexuality being expressed on a societal level, and ways that might influence people and community, and how it might impact the health system in a nation or a society, how it might impact the interaction between men and women, or men and men, or women and women, and all those things. But it's a way for each person to look at circumstances and draw their own conclusions and sentiments, rather than being handed those sentiments and not the tools to come by them yourself. And so when you're given those, but you're not given any any way to see past them or deeper than them or come to different sentiments, a lot of people end up feeling those sentiments are true, and they find it hard to not believe that, because the way they came by that belief is not a way that can be easily addressed. They grew up believing it to be axiomatic rather than subjective, or a conclusion that one has come to. They're told that this is the word of God, and even if later in life they, and I'm just using gay people as an example because it's a relatively inoffensive topic that is, at least where I'm from, used to demonstrate different attitudes religious people have versus non-religious people have. I could have picked other things, but that's just the first thing that came to mind. Um, Certainly, it's not. what the book is talking about. It's, sorcerers, but sort of like, okay, well, there's sorcerers, gay people, even historically in Germanic populations, sorcerers were viewed as, effeminate or feminine. Ergi are the male practitioners of Seither, which is sort of some Norse or Germanic witchcraft, quote unquote. And men who practiced it were viewed as feminine and viewed very negatively for that. So there is some overlap between sorcery and homosexuality and how it's perceived by people. But for the sake of this, what I'm speaking about and what this book is speaking about is that sentiments that one gets as a child are hard to move on from because they are learned at a stage of life where one is not thinking critically or possibly even really able to think too critically about those things. You're told this is the way things are, and you believe it. You're learning it. Why wouldn't it be true? And so the things that you learn at an early age like that can be very deeply embedded, not just consciously as something that you think is true, but is something that is part of the feeling of the world, that it is felt to be true because it predates conscious understanding and is rather instead a part of unconscious believing. And so even when faith in what has told you these things dies, the belief in those things remains. I don't know. Another example might be if an abusive parent said to their child that you're useless, or you are, you're too shy and people don't like you, and you know nobody's going to like you if you act like this, and stuff like that. Even in adulthood, when you're sort of dealing with those things, and you can recognize that your parent wasn't right, that none of that shit's true necessarily, right? I mean, there are people who are shy. It doesn't matter if your dad or your mom or whoever tells you that. That doesn't make it true. And even if you lose faith in your parents' ability to accurately gauge anything about the world or interpersonal relationships, it still feels true because it's what you were taught. And it's, as the book says in just one sentence, bollocks, where's the sentence? Faith may die, but her sentiments remain eternal. And I don't know, I think that's such an impactful statement and truth, I guess, that it's just, I don't know, not mind-boggling that it's given essentially no presence in the narrative. I just think it resonates a lot with me. Um, I said I don't have any of the religious faith stuff, but the other example I gave, and not the one about gay people, is sort of one I can relate to a little more. So it's interesting, and I'm sure for a commune, it sort of straddles both lines, where his father was abusive and sorcerer phobic. So he's probably getting shit on from both angles, and it's really hard for him to move on from that. Understandably so. So anyway, Moving on. Sorry, I talked a bit too much about that. I think I just ended up repeating myself. I feel like I do that a lot for some of these where the passage says a thing and I'm then like, oh yeah, that thing. Let me just say that thing again without really adding anything. So I feel like I look smart because I'm saying a smart thing, but I'm not saying anything extra. It's just the book that's smart. I'm just a parrot. But I don't know. I don't know. Maybe my talking is interesting to other people. If anything, it lets me talk about things and think about stuff. I don't know. I don't know. Let's see. Next bit discussion over the Holy War target. Yeah, not much to say here. You know, they not Sarah and Simis already know. Akamian doesn't. Not a whole lot of stuff going on. Then they mention Eärwa, which I have stuff to say about Eärwa and Akamian's relationship with him. Um, but just quickly, one of the sections here is referring to not Sarah and the mandate more in terms of the skeptics and the non-skeptics, and skeptics viewing the mandate as needing to learn from the past rather than living in it, and not Sarah's propensity to see threats where they might not exist and see the consult lurking, behind every shadow. Again, this sort of goes back to the PTSD angle where that sort of behavior is called hypervigilance. The brain is sort of stuck in a permanent state, not necessarily of full on fight or flight. That would be a panic attack. Um, but in a state of hypervigilance where it's constantly monitoring its surroundings for threats, potential threats, and it can be extremely taxing on the body. It increases the levels of cortisol. It is mentally fatiguing. It's really not a good thing. It's not very effective. It's effective in keeping you safe in unsafe environments, but that's the only thing it's good for. And unfortunately, a lot of the mandate um, probably suffer from it. Most, I would imagine, all of them do to some degree, especially regarding the consult. And this can drive their actions in ways that are not necessarily effective because they might be responding to shadows and not the consult, especially when they have someone like Simis who is sort of making sure they're responding to shadows and not the consult. Um, right? For example, later in the I'll get to that when we get to later in the chapter. So anyway, back to Eärwa and Akamian. We get to this little bit where is it this bit? Yeah. So Akamian is described, or maybe he's not describing, but it's being described. Akamian's feelings for Eärwa. Was it worth sacrificing Eärwa, his love, the boy who had so eased his weary heart, who had taught him to taste the air he breathed? Curse! I mean, that I have a couple thoughts about how Akamian views the boys that he mentored. In the last chapter, when I was talking about cheeky pomegranate, I didn't think that was really pederasty, and I just was making comment that out of all the people he could have chosen for runners, it's a little sus that he chooses the small, feminine, attractive boy out of all of the people in Carathuzel. But specifically with Eärwa and Proyas and the other students that he's mentored, I don't think he was fully pederastic insofar as there was really anything sexual. Um, I think possibly the thought may have crossed his mind, um, but I think primarily Akamian's attachment is more romantic to the boys that he has mentored. The way he speaks about, or the way that he feels about Inrao, and the way it's described in this chapter, is not a way that I would describe platonic love, right? It's not the way that I feel about my dad. It's not the way I feel about my mother or my sibling. It's, you know, who had taught him to taste the air he breathed? That's something a lover does, not something a family member does. Or maybe that's just me, and my family dynamics certainly weren't the healthiest growing up, so, who knows? But I don't know, that seems a little more like lover language rather than anything else. Um, and also for Proyas, um, later in the book, Atyersus makes some jab about Akamian being released for buggering Proyas. And I don't think that happened, but that also sort of shows the view other characters have of Akamian's relationship with his pupils, because it is this sort of heartfelt, romantic, intimate relationship that he has with them. I think it's difficult to not have the blurring of the lines be there. Um, and certainly, older men can have emotional closeness with younger boys without it being sexually charged. Um, and all too often, unfortunately, that's not the case. Um, and that's just sort of a reality, unfortunately. So, who knows? Especially, Akamian sort of has that Greek feeling to him, especially because I think of Enroni as being like a Greek fishing village, and so he already has that Greek feeling to his character in my mind, and he has that same sort of, you know, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, as my opa said, smart philosopher sort of vibe to him. So, it wouldn't surprise me if there were a little bit of aspect in Backer's mind when writing a commune and his relationship to Inrao and Proyas. Um, who knows? Anyway, moving on. There was another section regarding Inrao that I'll just read, and this is less to do with accusations or insinuations of pederasty or romantic feelings that maybe would be inappropriate to be having. But anyway, how could he not fall in love with such a boy? He could remember standing with him in this very place, watching silver sunlight roll across the back of swell after swell. The sun! Inrao had cried. And when Akamian had asked him what he meant, Inrao had merely laughed and said, "Can't you see? Can't you see the sun?" And then, excuse me, and then Akamian had seen lines of liquid sunlight dazzling the watery distance in inexhaustible glory. Beauty, that was Inrao's gift. He had never ceased to see beauty, and because of this he had always understood, always saw through and forgave the many blemishes that marred other men. With Inrao, forgiveness preceded rather than followed transgression. "Do what you will," his eyes said, "for you are already forgiven." Now, that last line specifically, "do what you will," His eyes said, "For you are already forgiven." I don't remember if this specifically comes up line, word for word later in the books when Akamian is dealing with Callus, but I would not be surprised, and I think Akamian's relationship with Inrao is a major vulnerability for Akamian when it comes to his interactions with Inrao, because I don't know, it's obvious, right? This deep emotional connection that Akamian had made to this boy um, is just one pathway that Akamian or Kellis can take to his heart and to use him. And I think part of it is I don't know, important because a lot of what it seems that Akamian had gleaned or read or gotten from Inra was nonverbal communication, which is almost more than verbal communication, truly the domain where the Dunyain are dominant. And so this is doubly powerful when used against a Kamian. And many times is it referenced how Kellis looks so much or strikes a facial expression that so reminds a Kamian of Inrao. Um, that shows how close Inrao was to his heart, how important their relationship had been, and just what sort of effect Inrao had had on Akamian by the ways that Kellis is able to manipulate him using his face, I guess, his expressions, his mien, uh, and so I don't know, poor Akamian. Now moving on, page 75. Oh shite! Did I move past that? It says that Akamian had viewed him as a son. Oh, right. In terms of Akamian viewing Inrao as his son, wanting to protect him and keep him safe. And I think part of this is Akamian sort of having a healing fantasy in regards to his own childhood, where he wants to reenact his childhood in a way that he wished his childhood had gone, using Inrao as a stand-in for himself and himself as a stand-in for his own father. And so he takes on this paternal role with Inrao and gives him the love and protection and care that he didn't receive from his father. And he cherishes in Inrao the innocence that he felt that he had lost as a child, not just from going to Atyersus and communing with the Siswath and Homunculus, but also from his father beating him and from living the life that he lived before, he saw the Onta and was taken away to Atyersus. So I think that's another piece of the puzzle in regards to the relationship between Akamian and Inrao. And that might even further factor into how Kellis can manipulate Akamian quite so much, and to quite a degree, despite transgressing against Akamian a lot, um, by using the face and the expressions of Inrao. He's also sort of invoking young Akamian, and so it would be a betrayal. A betrayal of Kellis in Akamian's mind thus becomes not just a betrayal of Kellis or a betrayal of Inrao, but a betrayal of himself as a child, and that's something, all three of those, any one of those would be painful for Akamian, but for them all three to be, stacked on top of each other, I think that does explain how Kellis really is able to get away with a lot of shit against Akami, and shit that is, stealing Esmenet, quote unquote stealing, love love is not a thing that can be stolen like that. Women aren't possessions and they can't, be stolen. That's just stupid. But, you know, I don't know. Kellis is Dunyan, and I think Akamian was especially vulnerable to being manipulated like that, more so than other people, because Akamian is such a deep feeler. Um, yeah. I sometimes feel like Akamian is like the Ikari Shinji of the darkness that comes before, and more broadly, the second apocalypse. Though I guess that role, maybe in the latter books, would be more fitting for Kelmomus being Shinji, because he wants to be with his mother. He, the no god being activated is sort of like Eva Zero, Eva 01, Eva Shogoki going berserk, and I'm not gonna turn this into a fucking Evangelion podcast, because the amount of autism necessary to combine the darkness that comes before with Evangelion is probably so dense that I'll just turn into a black hole and my apartment will be annihilated. So I'm gonna shy away from that combination and move on to my next note. Note Sarah's perspective. Oh, I already talked about that. Eärwa and Kellis, already talked about that. Oh, page 70 or page 80? Blah, blah, blah. No, maybe page 78. Okay, I don't know why. Oh, that is an 8. Sorry. So, page 78, one passage. Of the innumerable acts Akamian had committed in his lifetime, securing Inrao's escape was the one he considered a genuine accomplishment, the one act good in and of itself, even if he'd forsaken his school in order to achieve it. Akamian had protected innocence, had allowed it to flee to a safer place. How could anyone condemn such a thing? I always fucking cry when I reread that. Obviously not now because I just reread it, but that always makes me tear up and choke up. Like fucking poor Agami, and he has this tough life. He does shit that he doesn't feel good about, and then he sees this boy that he's in love with, and he can do something good, and he does it, and it just comes back to bite him in the ass. And it's like the world could not let him have this one thing. He could not escape even this. He could not have even this. Poor Akami, and no good deed goes unpunished. And then the little paragraph devoted to Esmenet. How many years had passed since he'd last visited Sumna? 5? 7? He idly wondered if he would find Esmenet there, whether she still lived. She had always been able to ease his heart, somehow. I imagine it's the sex. Right? Like, dude, it's not that complicated. And the emotional connection. We'll get to that. But, dude's a lonely, horny sorcerer. He's probably not that horny, but he's a dude. So, you know. Let's see. 8. Oh, yes. So, earlier in the chapter when I was rereading, I was thinking about, is this before or after Simus gets skin spied? Because that's, a big, somewhat inconsequential reveal at the end of the Thousandfold Thought, that Simus is a skin spy with a soul. And Nothing ever comes of that. It's never mentioned again. It's entirely fluff. But I was wondering, does that happen later in the books? Does that happen now? And then on page 80, Notsera watched the oblivious Simis for a moment, troubled by a flare of resentment. Why did he begrudge Simis so? Was it because the man's eyes had yet to fail, while Notsera, like so many others, had to rely on his students to read to him? Okay, that to me is pretty much proof that, yeah, he's a skin spy. If his vision is good, then he's a skin spy. I know that's a bit of a jump, but I think it's safe to say that he's a skin spy, especially because Simis is taking the charge on hunting out the infiltration of the mandate. So, yeah, how convenient. The infiltrator is the one in charge of finding the infiltrator. I wonder if he'll ever be found out. Spoiler alert. If it were not for Mathanet, no, Simis would not have been found out. Excuse me. Um, and yeah, so that's about it for this chapter. A little shorter than the other two so far. I'm okay with that. Maybe I'm just tired. Who knows? Maybe it's just a short chapter. But that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight. Um, I don't know. Oh, my AC just ticked on. Sorry if you can hear that. I don't even know if you can. And again, sorry if there were clicking noises. Still haven't gotten around to getting a new microphone. Don't know when I will. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like I said before, I'll try and read and respond to comments. I don't know why, but I get a lot of anxiety around that, which is weird. But I'll keep trying. I appreciate a lot of the comments. Certainly, I was was expecting that there were people out there who knew more than these books about me and had much better thoughts about them than I do, and it's been good reading those comments. Good. So I don't know. I will speak to y'all next time, presumably, unless for some reason I become mute, in which case I'll have to figure something else out. But if that happens, then this this podcast is going to be the least of my concerns. So whatever. Um, yeah. Good night, everybody. If it's nighttime for you, and if it's not, then have a good rest of your day.